Welcome to Way Back When, Big Blend Radio's history podcast. Welcome, everyone. Today is Labor Day, and we have an awesome show for you, whether you're listening on Labor Day or any day in the year. It is all about women and women who marched for their brothers, their husbands, their family in regards to a coal mine. And so we're going to Southeast Kansas, to Franklin. We are going directly over to the Miners Hall Museum, and we're going to talk about the Amazon Army March from 1921, which made national headlines. So stay tuned for that. You're listening to Big Blend Radio's Women Making History podcast, where we celebrate women of the past, the present, and the future. And this show, because you know what, the Miners Hall Museum is on the historic Jefferson Highway, is also featured on our Jefferson Highway show since it's Labor Day. It's on our Big Daily Blend podcast show or channel and on our Way Back When history channel. But first, let's bring Phyllis back on the show. Phyllis Bittner is from Miners Hall Museum Foundation, again in Franklin in Southeast Kansas. You could go to minershallmuseum.com. So welcome back, Phyllis. How are you?
Fine. Thank you for having us again. We're always happy to be on your show.
Yeah, you are a regular now, and I think this is so cool. We finally have Linda Knoll on the show, and Linda's really focused a lot of her time on the Women's March of the Amazon Army. I just, why the name Amazon? Welcome, Linda, but you know what? That's kind of bugging me. Where'd the word Amazon? Because I think we've got like Amazon women, and everyone has that picture in their mind, so it's different, right? Or what?
Sure. That originally, in Greek mythology, they were the warrior women. And unfortunately, that's what they were nicknamed when they started this wonderful crusade that they were trying to support their men with unfair working conditions and unfair law. And the New York Times is the first newspaper that dubbed them the Amazon Army. And from there on out, it went like fire across the nation, where they were called the Amazon Army. And when they were given a lot of newspaper coverage, they gave them a lot of military terminology. It was truly amazing that, how they framed this march, because it was unusual for women to do.
Wow. So now what's interesting is they met at the Union Hall, which is where Miners Hall Museum is, right, Phyllis? As well as it being on the Jefferson Highway. Actually, this was a little after the highway was formed, right? When we think about it.
Yes. And so our museum is located exactly on the site where the original Franklin Union Hall was, which was where the Amazon Army March began. And as you said, we are located directly on the Jefferson Highway, and we are now an official tourist center for them. We're pretty excited about that. So, and we have such a great story to tell with this, particularly the Amazon women. They were amazing.
Well, what's interesting too, I know when you first came on the show with Roger on the Jefferson Highway podcast, and he's on every fourth Thursday, and the Jefferson Highway show is like going to be almost daily, I'm starting to feel. And I know you talked about the Amazon Army March, and we talked about Linda coming on the show. I think this has been like 2 years in the making of this episode. So I'm so glad you're here, Linda. But I want to go to 1921, because when you think about the highway, it began in 1915, this corridor, the Jefferson Highway, going from Winnipeg in Manitoba, Canada, all the way down to New Orleans in Louisiana. And this was an amazing, when you think about Mr. Meredith, he was the publisher of Better Homes and Gardens, thinking about how these communities all connect together. Southeast Kansas, Franklin, where you are, this was like a massive coal mining town, but right now we would say it's a small community, right? So was it bigger at this time in 1921, like between the 1915 to 1921, it was a little bit bigger because of the mining, or not so much?
Absolutely. Coal mining was at its peak at that time. And in fact, when we talk about the Jefferson Highway, one of my ancestors, my grandfather, who is Austrian, who came over to mine coal at the age of 17, lived just a block or and a half off of the Jefferson Highway with my grandmother, who was from Slovenia. And they both lived in Franklin for about 85 years. That particular grandfather mined coal for 40 years without getting hurt. So Franklin was their home. Franklin was one of the mining camps. There are soon to be hundreds of camps. Some were just small little dinky mines that were numbered. Some had names, some had really crazy names like, Dogtown, Chicken Ridge. Some were named after people like my area where I grew up, where there was a farm not far from Franklin, or between Frontenac and Franklin, was called Dunkirk. There was Capaldo, named after an Italian miner. So they were scattered, wherever they sunk a mine, they would bring in those immigrants and they would start to work. So I have, family on both sides, one Italian, one Slovenian, that came to this area to mine coal.
Wow. Phyllis, remember you on one of our podcasts talking about the advertisements that went around the world, went to Europe pretty much, right? Saying the streets are paved in gold in Franklin, and let's all run to Franklin now.
Exactly. That's what they were trying to encourage the immigrants to come to this country. And they posted these wonderful advertisements about how wonderful it was going to be over here. And of course, once they arrived, it wasn't. The streets were not paved with gold. They were, it was poor living conditions for them. But they came and they worked hard.
So Phyllis, yeah, your family came to Kansas too, doing that kind of, mining work, right? And so this was all over the area, but your family decided to stay?
Yes. My family first came from Sylvania also, and they settled in Cherokee County for a very short time, but then they came to Franklin because the coal mining was booming there. And that's where they ended up staying. My dad went to work in the mines when he was 12. My grandfather was also a miner, and they ended up staying in Franklin the entire time. They didn't move with the mines later on. So, but the community was booming at that time. If you look at the old photos of the town, it was just like a little city. It had everything you could possibly want to sustain itself. It had movie theaters, barber shops, butcher shops, dance halls, everything, at pool halls. It was a very active little city on its own.
Also, and something to bring up when we talk about Labor Day, which things have changed due to labor workers' rights, is that we don't have young children working anymore, where we shouldn't. We know stuff happens that, we need to crack down on in this country. But and it's not as usual in this country as others, but that is a law that 12-year-olds aren't necessarily going to go work in a mine, where back then that happened, right?
Correct. And it's just heartbreaking to me to think, when I think of my grandchildren at the age of 12, and I think, oh my goodness, that's like puts it into reality for me that my dad went to work at that age. And that was very common. That wasn't unusual. That was a very common thing for children at the age of 12 to go work in the mines.
So for people to get an idea of what it was like, a visit to the Miners Hall Museum gives them what it was like living wise, how they entertain themselves. I know I've seen photos of the museum with musical instruments, some of the clothing, that kind of thing. So they understand what even a cabin, like a miner's cabin, is like, what it's like to live that way in those times.
Correct. That's we always like to tell everyone, just because we are called Miners Hall Museum, they're not going to come there and just see some mining tools. We actually tell the life of the immigrants from when they came to this country and all through their life in the United States, how they lived, how they worshiped, how education, their social life. We tell about the company stores, and there were some that came here were not miners. They were actually entrepreneurs. They set up their own little shops, whether it was a butcher shop or a clothing store or something. So we tell all of those stories. So it's really very interesting. And then Linda can tell you more, but she was instrumental in an actual miner's house that we have on the grounds.
Oh, tell us about the house, Linda.
Well, first of all, I want to kind of back up and say, to piggyback on what Phyllis was talking about how we got all these immigrants over here. Those broadsides that were created by an entrepreneur by the name of Franklin Plater, he named Pittsburgh. He's the guy who made the railroads happen. He was a Canadian he was a business person and whatnot. And he's the one who started the coal coming through the coal fields with his railroads. And with that, Pittsburgh was booming at that time. We talked about Franklin and a lot of other of these small coal camps. There were 5 major railheads coming out of Pittsburgh, taking this coal out. There was electric streetcar lines here where people in Franklin and Girard and Cherokee could come to shop almost 20, every 20 minutes. Some of the richest men really in the country invested here. They didn't live here, but they invested here. So like Phyllis said, these little camp towns had post offices, small little places in the late 1800s even. And that's, this all started booming. And so they all had all this access. We had the best roads. It's kind of funny, in the entire state at one time, as you know, we're talking about the Jefferson Highway. So that's the coal was king here, and it became a major industry because of smelting. You know, they started to smelt down in Galena, and we were second only to the nation of Belgium in the production of smelter. So there was this huge boom of industry, and Franklin Plater needed cheap labor. That's what they were looking for. So that he was this great advertiser. He came up with these posters that said, you know, paradise on earth, come to Southeast Kansas and mine coal. So the steamship companies would take them all through Europe and they'd tack them on the village square. And that was one way to get the people here as they went all over. You know, that was an industrial boom in the nation. So they went to the urban cities. But our people, like Phyllis's and mine, came through normally, you know, through Ellis Island. They were tagged and sent, you know, on a train down here to the Europa Hotel in Pittsburgh, where they were given, if they couldn't speak English, they were given they had family somewhere where they could connect with, or they were told which coal camp to go to. That's how my grandfather at 17 got here, you know, by himself. And a lot of people will tell you that they came young, and some came because to avoid tyranny in their countries. Some came because of poverty. Some came because of that American dream that was going on here. You know, but when they got here, the work was truly, truly treacherous. It was difficult.
And you have some harsh seasons to get ready for as well. I mean, you've got to think.
That's right. Yeah. And they worked, you know, sometimes miners only worked 180, maybe 189 days, like a school year, really, a year. And the miner's house that Phyllis was talking about, it was a camp, you know, it was actually built by a coal company in we can trace it to 1908, probably there earlier. They were just ramshackle shacks, really, so they could move them around, you know. Quickly if they had to on horse. Oh yeah, we got pictures of them moving, you know, these houses with a horse and a wagon. I mean, you know how they did that, but they were not insulated. You know, these poor people had to use like newspapers, you know, to kind of patch up the lack of any kind of real wall. One of the women I interviewed years ago complained that her children had every morning she had to clean their ears out and their nose out because of the coal dust. They couldn't get rid of that. You know, because it was very, the coal was bituminous and very dusty. And, you know,
I want people to know about the website. You can go to amazonarmy.org or amazonarmy.com. You give a list of the women. And you also talk about share some of their biographies. And I know you did a play on this too, right, Linda?
Yeah, that's how it started for me, really. You know, actually, I have to give credit to, he's no longer here, an archivist at Pittsburgh State University, a dear friend, he was a son of a coal miner from Camp 50, close to where Franklin is, another mining camp. And Jean de Gruson wrote a little collection of poems and stories about life in his coal camp growing up. And he happened to give JT and my husband and I a copy before the book was sent off for print, which, by the way, won an award. It's very good.
Oh, cool.
And I happened to have this book with me, and I would have lunch with my Italian grandmother between schools. And she was 88 at the time. Her name is Maggie Onilio. And I flipped through it and I saw this poem, Alien Women. And I thought, that's kind of good. So I start reading it to her. And while I'm reading, you know, she's cooking up, I remember some rigatoni because that was left over. And she just matter of factly looked at me and said, "Hey, Linda, I was in that march." And I go, "Well, no, you never said anything about it." And she laughed. She goes, "Well, you never asked me." So from that point on, that was 1986. That point on, I started, it's been close to 40 years now, collecting, you know, interviews and all that. And one of the things, Lisa, that was real important back in the day, because this history is not known. You know, it was covered over for a myriad of reasons. But we never had we never had anything to celebrate the history with, not an art object or a place. This was before Miners Hall. And so we got one of my friends, and she was director of an art council here in Pittsburgh, had a grant, and she's going to invite an artist down. She says, you know, all of you come in and we'll think about what we want him to do. It was going to be on education. Well, I happened to have my play with me because I had written it previous to that. I had done some things with students, but anyway, I had a play. So, you know, there was this lull when everybody was talking about, well, maybe we could do a playground theme. Maybe we can do, you know, something like that with the music department. So I said, well, what about this, what about our mining history? So I kind of threw that on the table, and the artists picked it up and went, oh. And then pretty soon people started saying, yeah, that's, about this women's march, about our mining history. So that was our first project. Took us a year. It was great. We went the artists stayed here, and we went all around the area and collected, diaries and information, and other people got involved. And one of the leading marchers' sons was still alive, the ex-congressman Joe Skubitz in Wichita. We got to interview him, and I got Mary's journal at the time. And what came out of that was the mural Solidarity, which is now, I think, part of the Jefferson Highway because it sits in the Pittsburgh Public Library. It was dedicated in 2000. But we did the play ahead of that, Lisa, and we had kids from multiple schools. And we had a packed house. It was done in Girard at the time. And after the play and after the dedication of the mural, Joe Skubitz got up. He was 94 at the time. And we had gone up a couple of times to visit him with students. He loved, he just loved this idea of what we were doing. He brought his son, who was retired attorney, Dan. He brought his grandchildren, his children. And that night, Lisa, was the first night that any of them, among other people in the audience, found out anything about this history.
Oh.
Nothing about it up until then. So that was our first.
But it had made national headlines. When you think about those days, getting the national headlines, obviously the trains helped with everything, right? So that is just amazing to hear. And I love that this story is being told now because women are marching in different ways and doing things and hasn't ended. And so it's just interesting how history repeats itself. But women, have always stood up for the men in their lives. And this is one of those stories that I think is really fascinating because, I've even Ludlow, Colorado, they stood up as well. And I think it was men and women, and that was a very sad. It's a massacre actually in a way. What happened to those miners standing up for their rights, and the National Guard came in. It was just a horrible. They were underground even. And anyway, I won't go into all of that history. It's morbid, but they did have some success with this march. So, Linda, can you tell us what were the conditions for the men? Obviously, the coal being everywhere, right? That's not a healthy thing. That today we would really fight against that too. In regards to coal, the pollution in the air, right? But what were the conditions like for the men in their lives that made them stand up? And what did you ever hear from the men's side of the story about the women standing up? Were they for that or nervous about their jobs in general, like as a whole? Because that's to make this decision. It's a scary thing. It's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? In a way.
That's exactly right. That's always been the position of where they were in, the stress of that. Well, first of all, mining, the areas where it was just treacherous was falling rocks happened all the time. My grandmother lost her brother, who was 19, the first day he went to work. And he went to work because his father was gone. So that was one treacherous thing. Plus the dust in the coal was, you could ignite, it was just really everywhere.
It's dirty,
That's what happened in the 1888 Frontenac explosion. That, it just ignited and the whole thing blew up. And also just the nature with your lungs and with being down there. So there were those problems. But beyond that, people were even, you weren't paid with real money. And the money you got, you had to buy everything at the company store. And as Mother Jones would say, when you were talking about Ludlow, she was also here. Mother Mary Harris Jones came here. She was a union leader here. She'd say that's where the company store is where a can of beans would cost you twice where it would cost anywhere else because they had to buy everything there. They were, and you had to pay rent for your mine shack. You had to buy your tools there.
So this is like sharecropping in a way.
Yeah, it was.
Because in some of the sharecropping cabins, they used to put mud and newspaper on the walls, just like you're saying. Same thing.
The conditions were horrible. So people had to take it upon themselves to try to make a difference because they knew coming down, like Phyllis says, their 12-year-old kids were going to be the next step to work in these mines. And they worked with their fathers a lot of times, it's half time. So that's really what happened. As mining companies made more and more money And people were getting, less and less of that. 1919, a series of strikes. That's really, when we're talking about labor, our Labor Day events. There were a lot of like wildcat strikes here. They're exaggerated maybe, but maybe 100 a year of this strike, that strike. But in 1919, after World War I was over, the miners during the war said, okay, we're not going to ask for anything. We're just going to do our jobs, which they did. They were paid what they were years before. But in 1919, the coal companies started making lots of money because, then, things just hepped up again after the war, and the miners weren't getting anything. So at that time, the union, the International Union by the now Lewis was the head, he decided to take all of Kansas out on strike in 1919.
Wow.
Yeah. And down here was probably the most volatile and most energetic part of that mining group, because Southeast Kansas is the mining area, was Alexander Howard. He was the leader of District 14, a dynamic president who he was well loved. He was part of that. He took 12,000 of his men with him. They went out. Well, President Wilson at the time, I think he was dealing with another steel strike or something. He just couldn't handle it. So you got to go back. We're going to have to do something different. Well, the miners were asking for a 60% raise and only working, I think, like 5 days, a week instead of, a big raise. But anyway, that's what they were asking for. Wilson asked him to come back. John L. Lewis said, well, we're going to have to go back. So he decides to pull him in. And Alex Howitt says, we're not going. And the rest, John's group went, but not Alex's. He said, and the miners really, to a T, would have done anything for him, and they stayed out. Alex knew they only had X amount of weeks for coal left. It was so traumatic that the governor at the time, Governor Allen, who was begging him, John L. Lewis, do this or do that, and couldn't move him, brings the state government down to the Stillwell Hotel to try to put some sense into Alex Howard. But Alex Howard didn't know Wilson, and the story goes, finally the president actually intervened, talked to Howard, promised him, they did get a raise. It wasn't 60%. It was a 14% raise. The president promised a commission to study the conditions. And that's what broke the strike. So that's how volatile. But the Kansas government did not forget that. You know what I mean? So that was 1919. So then we move into 1920. And the legislature decided they didn't like the fact that there were strikes going on. They decided to outlaw. Well, so they passed.
Hello.
Yeah, they passed what they called the Industrial Port Act, or port, law. And it said you couldn't strike. You had to go through a process of arbitration and all this, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know how that goes. There was a young man here. His name was Carl Mishmash, and his father had died. The kid was working for the full time, and they didn't want to pay him. The company paid him half time. And Alex said, you can't do that. And they said, oh, yes, we can. You're going to have to go through all this, arbitration. He goes, no, we're not. We're going to walk out again. So the stage was set for the women, because the men decided then we're supporting Howard. This is wrong. Howard said, this is unconstitutional. You can't do this. They jailed Howard. He was put in jail. Then they ended up jailing all the union officers at the time. And in that situation, with that kind of cloud over everything, the women who now have passed, the International Union is not supporting them because John L. Lewis told them to go back. Their people are in jail, and some miners need to go back to work because they're starving, their family. So that's what set the stage for what Phyllis is talking about, the visit in Franklin. Women wanted to do something in support of these men who they felt were making progress, doing the right thing.
So they start marching. So how many women do you think, Phyllis?
Very, it sounds really unbelievable, because that first day they met, 500 women, supposedly, and there is some evidence for that, met in the Franklin Union Hall to decide what to do. And among there were women who, like Mary Skubitz, there wasn't a real leader, but she became one of them because she knew 5 languages. She was very adamant that they needed to make changes because her own husband, Joe, who was Joe Skubitz's dad, Joe, he was a shot firer, and he was a little guy. So he would run in and they'd pay him an extra $1 a day to go in mines at night to light these short fuses of dynamite. And they'd have to run like crazy to get out. So Mary would bandage her husband's skull, he would be burned a lot. And, in order to get that little extra money. So she was very adamant in that. So anyway, that was 500 women who met that next day, according to her and some others. That very next day, they started to get thousands, and no one ever dropped out. And interestingly enough, it wasn't immigrant women. There were women who had already been naturalized, American citizens. There was a group of women, and there were immigrant women there who hadn't been, naturalized yet, but a lot of them were married, very stable. In that situation, they felt like they were Americans, really.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the photo behind you, that's the Amazon women, right? Marching. I mean, that goes as far as the eye can see with those women all the way down there. And look at the roads. These aren't like, easy, pretty paved roads, but they were really good roads back then, as you say. But, so they go marching. But Phyllis, you told us on a podcast, I'm like, we have to do this. And now we're finally doing it. It's like, yay. Phyllis, you were saying that they were banging pots and pans. I mean, that was their marching tools, we're a little different. Yeah.
And that photo behind Linda is really one of my favorite pieces in the museum. And that is an actual true photo from the New York newspaper. So we know it's accurate. But if you look at it and you see, like you say, it goes on forever, how many women and their children marching along with them. They're all, not all, but they are carrying American flags. They were happy to be in this country, and they were standing up for what they thought was the right thing. You look in the background, it's such a true picture of that time. You can see the old mining, a few homes in the background, the little mining shacks behind them. And as you said, that dirt road. And think of those women, those thousands of women, they weren't all from the same country. So you can imagine all the languages. They didn't all speak English. And as Linda said, was it Mary Skubitz that could speak the 5 languages? So she was able to communicate. But I don't know if today, if I would have the courage to do that. Those were very courageous women. And they did. They went out armed with, they had their like wash tubs or foot tubs and wooden spoons that they would beat on the bottom of the pail with. And that was their noisemaker. And yet they sent out the Army, the National Guard. So imagine they were facing armed men with a wash tub and a wooden spoon, So it was really, they were very brave women. Very brave.
They're going, come here, son. I'm going to get you with my wooden spoon. We know about those wooden spoons. My mama had one.
Right. But it was no matter gun from the, the Army, or the National Guard.
Yeah. Wow. And Linda, am I correct in that they did get success with the mine? Like didn't they close the mine for 3 days because of this?
They did have some success, but it appeared that they didn't, according to the papers, but they did. They did go through 3 days. They did march, and they went to, from what in the research I have, almost 60 mines, which is almost all Crawford County, and they would split up. That's how they did it, and my grandmother had some really good details about that when I was able to talk to her about the details, because the women who had these, the flags, they would not tell where they were. Only the lead women would tell where they would be, going next. Mary talks about, trying to get the law enforcement on their side, because the sheriff showed up on the first day and he's like wild. He's like, my God, the sheriff is saying there must be like 3,000 women here. Mary said, now, I love Mary Skubitz. She says, he was here. He was elected to defend all of Crawford County. So she told him and the other leaders that all they wanted to do was talk to these men, tell them to come out, and not work for this particular activity, because they were, and to support this union event. That's all they wanted to do. Well, the law enforcement had nothing. No, they were not going to have that. They were there to protect the coal companies and the mine, basically. Initially, when they got arrested, and 49 were arrested, it was for just trespassing. The newspapers exaggerated the event so much because the fact of the gender inequity, really, that to have women out there marching was not considered ladylike. There were all kinds of, for example, the Kansas City Beacon said that the women used their teeth like tigresses and their claws on men. Well, that wasn't true. They called them terrorists. They called them guerrilla warfare, although the guerrilla warfare was the red pepper. The only thing they had was, the red pepper from Clemence's mother, Julia, who wanted to just, she ran a country grocery store against a company store. And she said that they'll throw red pepper in. Well, that's how they kind of got out of it. They started moving out by bartering and then, starting and she had a store. And so she was going to, throw red pepper just at them. She made a comment and we'll use black pepper when the red runs out. But they had nothing. They had no weapons of any kind, but yet almost every newspaper article would have something military. They identified a young girl on Annie Stovich, General Annie Stovich. She was a 14-year-old girl on a car. You had to really hunt to see how they were portrayed. They were given higher bonds to get out of jail. Most of the women were not given of the warrant themselves. Of the 49, Mary Skubitz was arrested twice along with her mother, but they were given to the husbands to give to the wives.
Oh my gosh. It's just the way it was back then, a little different. For sure. Really different.
Yeah, it was gender. It was not pleasant. And consequently, none of these women, including Mary Skubitz, who I talked to her families after that, none of them ever talked about this.
Wow. So this is just kind of this hidden history, but it's like they had a lot of gumption, a lot of spirit,
Amazing amount of bravery. Because at the time, at the time they were called, because after, let's talk about, they did make a difference. Let me say that right after the 3 days, the reason they stopped at 3 days is they heard from an anonymous source that met them at the crossroads that of the country roads they were on, that the governor was going to send down the state militia. And that's that's why this is such an exciting thing, because you start finding out what was behind it all. But the governor was sending out 4 troops of Kansas National Guard cavalry were coming down. By the way, these are the same cavalry units that came down here in 1919 when the strike was on. They used the National Guard, and they used college boys from KU, from Washburn, to come down and work in the mines for these Bolsheviks who were not working. They were on strike.
Wow.
Yeah. So see, it was tense. This was not, this was like a firecracker that could go off. So the governor, so that Mary, they talk about it. They decide, hey, they gather as the women want to keep going. They say, this is wrong. We'll just keep marching. We'll face the militia. We don't mind if we die. That's how they knew that it was just with these young soldiers on their horses, someone's going to get hurt. That was not the intention. They were able to convince them that they had done what they needed to do. So after that 3 days, very quietly, a mining report came out from the Kansas State Division, and it said, but it really didn't make a lot of press, that the Amazon Army, which they called them that, had made a very big dent in the 3,500 men who were working at the time down to about 700. And I did find that at sea. Wow. So they made a dent, but it didn't appear that way after the march, because the Attorney General, the state of Kansas, how it decided at that time, these men got to go back because, they've got, so they went back and they were given no voice or vote in the union. They could belong to the union, but they couldn't have any voice or vote. They were charged more initiation fee. And then the Attorney General passed a resolution down here, if you can even imagine this, that it was illegal not to accept work if work was available. So if you didn't work, if there was work, you were given 30 days of hard labor. That was one issue.
Which one is the hardest labor? Come on.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Try to find something harder, right? But you see what I mean? That's the situation they were in at the time. They were not vindicated. They were just ousted out, all of that. But if you kind of look you dig a little deeper, you find out that, Governor Allen was a fairly popular governor at the time. But these women, and you got to piece it together, but they started campaigning. See, the right to vote just came in 1920.
So this is just sliding in.
Oh, yeah. Now, some women, Kansas was a little progressive. My grandmother who marched, she was actually on a school board in a small country school in Lone Elm. But the point is, yes, they really hadn't participated in a national election. But anyway, that year, Allen lost. Allen lost his bid, and the sheriff that supposedly, deputized 1,000 men against them in case they the Amazons got unruly. He also lost his bid. So they made, and then they were vindicated 3 years later when the Supreme Court ousted the Industrial Court Act, saying it was unconstitutional. You have the right to strike.
See, this is exactly it. When things go away, you still need to stand up. And when you win something, know that someone's coming back to take it away. That's what I've learned through just so many interviews and issues that we've covered over years, is that you think, oh, and we finally won this. It's been like 5 years of doing interviews about it. We've done a lot in regards to our public lands and on issues on protecting some really sacred historic sites, especially for our indigenous people, and including coal mining areas in the Navajo Nation. So anyway, that's a whole other show, but you gain something and a new administration can come in, something can happen, and it starts all over again. But the thing is, and people lose hope, but the reality is you've already fought that war and the new people haven't. You have. So you got a foothold and you got to keep going. And so, it's interesting, like, suddenly you're not allowed you're not allowed to strike. Totally unconstitutional. However, it doesn't mean that it's always going to stay that way. You have to get your foot back in that saddle immediately and keep fighting. And I think this is what's so important about today's show, is to show strength, resilience against all odds, and to keep going. You know what I mean?
And also,
they did make some kind of success with that,
social reforms that came out of here. They started really all kinds of things. The 8-hour workday, child labor laws, everything we're talking about, they stood up when it was not,
it wasn't popular. Yeah.
Later, Teddy Roosevelt, a bunch of people picked it up, years later. They stood up when it was tough.
Exactly. It's like doing the Me Too movement, the first one, that it's always harder on the first ones, and then you pass the torch down, as we look at it. So all these things happens. I got to go to you, Phyllis. When did the Moonshining? What years are we on with Moonshining? Are the same women moonshining to make extra money? Are we talking about the same people?
Yes, we are. We're talking about the same period of time, because the coal mining did not pay that much. And so that was a way to help support their families. That was very common. And, we all laugh that we know one of our ancestors' names going to pop up in the newspaper about that they were arrested 100 years ago. But they were, I say all, but a lot were doing it because they had to support their family. And so it was going on at the same time.
I love this. Well, thank you, ladies, for what you do, and everybody involved with the museum, too, for keeping our history alive and sharing these stories. They're hard stories at times, but we also have to not lose those stories when we tell the American story. These are stories that need to stay front and center. So I really appreciate that. And so look at the Jefferson Highway with this. I think we're going to have to make a women's history map for the Jefferson Highway. What do you think, Phyllis?
Wow, I love the idea. I love the idea. Like I say, it's such a great story. We have people that will stop in at the museum who have no mining connection, but they'll stop, and we receive nothing but compliments because they love the story. They love the story of that family. And it's similar to what's going on today, but it's, the immigrants coming here and starting out and what they had to face. And so it's a wonderful story. It's sad, it's happy, there's some funny things, it's just really a wonderful story. So I think anyone that would come through, and see this, they would enjoy a visit and learning about this.
Linda, what's next for you in regards to the Amazon Army? Do you see like a book or the play going further, or like a documentary? Like, come on, man. We can't just be the podcast.
I'm still working, so I'm still teaching. But I do want to do a book, and I would like to see this into a film. Definitely. It's been 40 years. It's got legs. But we've won a PBS Emmy, almost. We were nominated for a little part of the play from Sunflower Journeys. I just finished working within the PBS at Kansas, A Great Women of Kansas. The Amazon made it into their little part 2 group. You know what I mean? Which is, awesome. It's awesome. But you're right. This story, no matter who hears it, you don't have to have mining background. The play has been done for 2 U.S. Department of History grants. It's been done for the Franklin Centennial, and and at Pittsburgh State for the Kansas Regents Honor Societies. It's really beyond, just talking about our section. It's a human story. And that's why, I don't, and the people, we didn't even talk about some of the women's interviews.
Yeah.
And their families who don't know anything. They're still coming out. That I'll get a call from somebody who's trying to do. I'm putting together something for my dad's 80th birthday, and they find out their grandmother, their great grandmother, who they lived with in Chicago, was in this march and was arrested, and they knew none of this history. And they were part of we did a exhibit for the centennial at the museum, and there we invited some of these wonderful grandchildren of these women who, by the way, mostly all of these people that I've talked to, the young people, were all educated, meaning, I think these women early on, I knew my family did, wanted to make sure that their children didn't have to do this kind of work. They would support anything, and they supported the schools here. So we have a very strong tradition in education.
Oh.
And but that is, the legacy lives on. I've got a lot of plans. I'm part of this. We have the Miners Memorial. I know that's part of the Jefferson Highway on the Pittsburgh trip. That was done in 2007. Of course, Phyllis took the Franklin Community Center and decided, let's do a museum in 2012. JT and my husband and I have been part of those things too. So it's just Frontenac. We're helping Frontenac too now. They have a wonderful camp town kind of museum. And then we've got Big Brutus. Look at how many connections, and it's all these immigrant, all through our families. It's all, Phyllis's family, I knew her names growing up, you know what I mean? And Franklin, we have similar connections. When the families married, the Italian families and the Slovenes, then you shared all this rich food, you get food, and then they started combining things. Everybody's got French cookies, right, Phyllis, if you're Italian?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
There's so much connection with women going through this period. Before we leave, I would like to, and I don't know, are we ending up? Because I wanted to read, how I start everything is with that poem, and I'd like to end it with.
I do want to say, just do a shout out you make a very strong point for families to sit down with their elders and get these stories and ask some prompts like, have you ever done something as wild as this kind of thing? Because we look at even the silent generation in World War II all the way down. There was this very keep quiet, move forward, don't, keep your nose clean. And then, yes, we're going to do something when we really have to, but we're going to keep moving forward. That's the past, move forward. And I think we have to be the ones to poke and prod, and time is running out, y'all. I'm just saying on these kinds of stories. So it's important to do. And we have technology now where you can record video or a voice, and keep these stories and share them. And look at how many, I think, doing family history, genealogy is like one of the top hobbies in the world. And I love Find Your Roots on PBS Talk. Got to take care of our PBS people. Just saying, so all of those things are so important. But it starts also at home and getting those stories. And it's a way for the youth in our families to get together and maybe do a project, like get the kids together as a family project so the kids can get interested in the history and learn these lessons, because these are life lessons that these women have taught us, I believe, are life lessons. You're saying it's a human story, but it is a story of resilience. And look at all these women now, lived around the world, and ancestors of them, not ancestors, their descendants live across the country and around the world, and they come from around the world. So this is a human story for the world that affects a small portion of Kansas. And before you read the poem, what is happening with Big Brutus? Phyllis, you want to tell everybody about who Big Brutus is and what's happening with this giant piece of equipment? Like, this is going to be like a giant on the highway.
We're bringing. Okay, Big Brutus is its own museum, and that is located in Cherokee County. They have their own little museum, or a museum, and it's another great place to stop. We are also bringing a one of a kind. It's a walking drag line to Franklin. It will be on a piece of our property. It'll be about 5 blocks away from the museum. It will be the largest one in the United States and only one of 2 that has been preserved for public display. It's going to be located right along the Jefferson Highway. It's a page 618 walking drag line. So it's pretty unique, and it will get a lot of attention on that highway. And we'll have a pavilion, and we'll be telling the story of that. And then, of course, invite people to come to the museum here to learn more about it. But it's going to be exciting, and we hope to have it on site by the end of this year. And then it'll take us a while to develop the whole park. We'll have a wildflower meadow and a butterfly garden. It's going to be a beautiful corner, and no one will miss it. If you're traveling on 69 or 47, any of the major highways, you won't miss it. It'll be very noticeable.
And you'll have to come back on a podcast, see.
Oh, yes. The move itself is going to be amazing. I mean, we are not as big as Big Brutus, because Big Brutus is a very unique machine, but we are as unique just because of, the facts about the machine. So we're excited about the project.
A sculpture of women marching.
Yeah, well, I think that's in Linda's project.
We're working on it. The museum is part of that story. It's in the works.
We have one piece of ground on.
Will help you donation-wise? Oh, thought I'd ask,
Yeah, and you can donate directly on the website. There's a link you can donate to any of the projects. So you go to minershallmuseum.com, and you can just click on the link and donate through that. So, but we have a spot at the museum that we won't put anything on that ground, because we're saving that for the future, for the Amazon army, some kind of.
They're going to come marching.
Behind Phyllis right now. See, they're included in almost every story that we're telling on the museum. That's for sure. And they're a mural.
So donations are great. I mean, we're at the last quarter of the year, believe it or not. I don't know how that happened. I really don't, but it's here. And so a lot of people may be going, well, I got to shift this around before that next year comes around. So I'm just saying, shift it over.
Right. There's so many ways to give to us, Lisa, like Phyllis was talking about, like the Dragline Park. All these projects are big ones, and they could really use the collaboration and help and support of anyone, who wants to be a part of it.
So volunteers. And so do you need someone to come plant the garden for you?
Yeah. Well, actually, the state is working, but, we'll have upkeep and maintenance. The state is actually helping us with the wildflower meadow. We have another Peyton's potting shed. She's going to create the butterfly garden for us and is donating the plants. So we have a lot of people helping with a lot of things, but still, there's the day-to-day, just the maintenance, electricity, insurance, and we aren't finished with the park. I mean, we're just in the early stages, so we have a lot of plans, and like I say, and it's going to be a national. I mean, it's the state's involved with it. It's a big project that I think people would be excited to be a part of, and they don't have to be coal mining enthusiasts. People who like big equipment. Someone has even said science fiction. Think of a walking dragline. I mean, it looks like a robot. I mean, it's really a unique thing. So there's just a lot of different ways that this is going to create interest along that Jefferson Highway. So, and people want to be a part of it. And if they want to send us $5, or if they want to put us in their estate planning, we're happy either way. And they can do that online. They can go right to the website and, make a donation. And we're all volunteers. So all the money goes directly to a project. They donate. It's coming into the museum and being used to preserve this wonderful history. None of us are paid. We are all volunteers. We have one staff member working in the office. She just keeps the doors open for us. But all the money goes directly to a project, 100%.
That's awesome. I want to give a shout out to the Jefferson Highway Association, how we all met. Also, all volunteer. And please, if you're in the region, be a member of that. Very cost effective. You can go to jeffersonhighway.org. And also go to jeffersonhighwaytravelguide.com. Check that out for planning your Jefferson Highway adventures. Okay, so Linda, you got a poem for us? We love poetry here.
It's a short one. Million Women for Clemence Mercy de Gruson. In 21, my mother still herself at 17 marched for Alexander Howitt to bust the scabs who worked the mines in place of the fathers and husbands of the 1,000 women who marched with her, carrying their men's pit buckets filled with red pepper to throw in the eyes of the poor scabs who cursed back in English to their Slovene, German, French, and Italian over the state militia's rifle fire. It's all dim in her mind now. She remembers only that she was hungry and frightened. She does not remember Judge Curran, who said, Well, it's a fact that there are Bolsheviki, communist, and anarchists among the alien women of this community, and it was the lawlessness of these women that made it necessary to station the state militia in our county for 2 months to preserve law and order. She does not remember that they were called an army of Amazons.
Wow. That's a perfect close. Wow. That's going to sit with me for a bit. I love that. Thank you both so much for joining us on the show. Happy fall, y'all.
Happy travels.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us here on Big Blend Radio's Way Back When History Podcast. Keep up with us at bigblendradio.com.